we have these pinnacles that we think we have to reach to say we're resilient or strong or courageous, but we're much stronger, I think, than we think. And we have to I think people need to give themselves credit for that.
Welcome, man. Welcome to the pod.
Yeah, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, man, it's good to have you. Why don't you kick it off, man? Talk about how you found out about Stoicism. I know you got an interesting story on that, and what you do.
Yeah, for sure. I'm an educator by profession, school principal, but my Stoicism story is quite unique, I think. I was always interested in history and ancient philosophies and matters of that nature, and had the opportunity to travel to Greece not long ago that reignited my passion in Stoicism specifically. And that journey has taken me down many different paths, many different study avenues and that sort of thing. Came across you from another podcast. You were a guest on another podcast, and immediately started listening to you, and I'm really, really glad to be here.
Yeah, they would know. I think Mike and Kristen.
Kristen
Harrington and Mike Ryan. Yeah, they were both on the pod individually, and yeah, I went on theirs. They're local, so yeah, it was a cool little friend circle thing there. Yeah, so tell me about your what you do a little bit more like for work.
Yeah, so I'm a school principal here in the Halifax region. My journey has been quite unique as an educator. I've always worked with junior high age, senior high age students, and in many different roles and many different capacities. I started as an English teacher, English history teacher. That's kind of where my educational background lies, and then transitioned into many different roles, different types of support roles, and that sort of thing, and then eventually found myself into leadership. This would be my 8th year as an educational leader, administrator in a school. So it's been quite a journey.
That seems like a long time for me. I remember when I was in elementary, I was like every year you'd have a new principal. So kudos, man, to kicking ass for that long and as a principal.
Yeah, it's my third school. My first school as a principal, third school as an administrator. So 8 years flies by. It doesn't take long.
Yeah, it does, man. That's for sure. So the topic we wanted to get into from the Stoic perspective today was Stoic resilience. And, you and I spoke about it quite a bit, just personally. And, obviously it's a topic, the Strong Stoic podcast. There's a strength aspect in there, and you could talk strength, resilience, even endurance. But I guess one of the cues that kind of came to mind when we were talking about this was, you are stronger than you think you are, or that you believe you are. And so I have many ways that resonates with me, but what does that kind of stir up for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways we could look at that concept, but it's certainly similar to you, resonates in many different ways with me. I think, I'm almost in my 40th year of life here, which is also hard to believe, but I've been through a lot of situations, I guess, in my life to date that, would seemingly be, in retrospect, very challenging. When you're in the moment, you might not recognize how challenging they actually are, and you get your way through them. You find your way through them. You seek help and assistance to get your way through them, and you're always stronger, I think, when you come out the other side. And I think that aligns perfect with our conversation here today, that I think individuals are often stronger than they perceive themselves to be or give themselves credit to be. Easier said than done when you're in some difficult situations in life or you need to be resilient, but I do think most individuals are stronger than than they let themselves believe that they are.
Mm-hmm. I see that a lot with, I see it in the fitness world. So you'll see someone who, particularly a beginner, will go into the gym and they might, pick up a weight, and it looks easy from the outside as someone who, has experience with this. But then you ask them and they're like, oh, I'm so close to my max, or I feel like, I couldn't do any more. And then as you kind of get experience in the gym, you start to realize that like the what's going to stop you from doing a particular exercise is your mind. It's very rarely your body. And it is your body eventually. You go to failure for some things. But being able to really push through reps, it's very interesting because even today, I mean, I've been exercising for like 16 years, and I'm doing an exercise and my mind's telling me to stop. I can't do another one. And if I push, I can do another one and another one and another one. And so it's pretty crazy how much from a physical perspective you can kind of push yourself. And then we get into the stoicism, which is like the more of the mental aspect of that, the strength of character, right? Yeah, I'm curious if you resonate with that at all, or if you have maybe another.
Yeah, I think the physical one is for sure. I often find myself in that situation too. Whether it's through daily living tasks, like you have a checklist of things to do and you're tired or what have you, and you just get something else done. But the resilience in terms of emotional and that angle is a whole different, not maybe not so different than physical, but I think the physical one is something that people might resonate with a little bit more than the emotional one in my experience. But that question of what keeps you going, or mind over matter, or this too shall pass, that old saying there, are some of the things that resonate a lot with me. And when you have a lot of experience, or you're able to be reflective about resilience, you look back at your life and realize that things did pass that were difficult or challenging, and you were likely stronger than you thought you were. But that reflection piece is, I think, something that not a lot of people necessarily are willing to engage in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's hard because if you, whenever you feel, say, like you're at your max, for you to accept that means you have to accept that you're lowering your self standards also, right? Which is a scary thing. You look at people like David Goggins, who just push the limits on what the human body can do. In my mind, perhaps past what a Stoic might do, because he, degrades his body and he's pushing through pain sometimes unnecessarily. Nevertheless, I think in his mind, he sees himself as someone who wants to maximize resilience and just show the world and show people that you can push yourself so much further than you think. And it's like you said, like hindsight, when you're looking back at things that you've been through, yeah, it's like, yeah, it was kind of hard. But in the moment, sometimes it's like you feel like you don't have anything at all. And so like one of the questions there is like, how do you even, you're in that moment, you're in that tough moment. And like, how do you even push yourself through that? Sometimes you have no choice. Sometimes you can put the squat bar back on the, back on the rack. But like, what do you tap into to push?
Yeah, I think the Stoics would say, to a certain degree, about appearances, right? So it's not so much what's happening, but your opinion or your feeling about what's happening. I find that's something that helps me a lot when I'm in a situation that requires resilience, is breaking it down to those molecular levels of what is happening right now, and is it just my opinion of what's happening that's holding me back? Is this as difficult as it appears to be, or am I just labeling it as being difficult? That's a slippery slope, I think, because some things truly are, many things in life, physical and emotional, are extremely difficult. But We often label opinions on things that lend us to want to quit or withdraw. And I think when we look at it as just, this is a difficult task or it's a difficult moment, but that's really just my opinion of it. And I can look at it maybe in a more embracing way, or in a different light, where this is what's happening and this is what I can do about it, and not get trapped in those appearances that try to lean us the other way. I think momentum is a big. I don't know if the Stoics would really lean too hard into momentum, but similar to what we just discussed moments ago, as you go through multiple things over and over again, uh, the next thing that comes up in your life, physically or emotionally, you can lean on those past experiences and recognize that I've been here before, or I've been in similar situations before, and then this is just another one of those situations. Um, and I think leaning into that is really important. I think we often, in the past, I think I've maybe tried to stray away from difficulties in life, or try to avoid them. And I think a big piece of resilience is, and the Stoics would lead into this as well, um, is to just embrace that life is difficult. And you're going to have difficult moments, and you're going to have difficult times, and you have to find ways to navigate those. I think we often, and again, I was guilty of this probably in the past, lean away from difficult moments or situations. And I think you can only do that so far. Life is fairly challenging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like not all difficulties are worth leaning into also. So there takes, I suppose, like some wisdom in knowing what's valuable and what's not, and yeah, that's an important thing too, because you can certainly be, again, to get to the Goggins example of pushing past pain that maybe you shouldn't push through, right? Like maybe this is actually overall detrimental. And so there is wisdom that comes in there. That being said, I'd be curious to know what you think of this, but I think we have a pretty good intuitive sense of, what difficulty that we're shying away from is actually net beneficial in the end. Like, I think we kind of know, and I know you're speaking to some of your personal experiences, and I have my own as well, where in the moment, yeah, I knew bloody well that embracing that, facing that difficult situation was the right thing and would have resulted in growth. But for whatever reason at the time, shied away from it.
Yeah, I'm just recently reading Epictetus's writings, and coincidentally, he talks a little bit about that the wisdom to know what to lean into and what not to lean into, but also to not necessarily stray away from things, or not let difficult situations kind of define the path that you're going to take, and letting some of that stuff go, what would be that, whatever appearances are present, or whatever uh, criteria is there that would make you try to lean away from it. Maybe we shouldn't just be so worried about those things as we are, whether it's how somebody else feels, or what impact certain decisions are going to have on certain scenarios. I think Epictetus talks a lot about that. That's for maybe those individuals or those scenarios to work through. But if it's virtuous and it's what's right for you and your character and your alignment with nature, you should take those difficult situations on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think there's some, you spoke to how, life is inherently difficult. There are difficulties that you can't really escape from. So, it's kind of Peterson has this line. He says something like, you can either choose a cross or have one dropped on you. Like you don't get to choose to not carry a cross. And you and I spoke about in the past on how not that long ago, probably my grandfather's generation, even my father's generation, I remember he was telling me how, they would put out the fire at night because they were afraid that the house would burn down. And so they would always put the fire out in the wintertime. And the house would be freezing, just freezing all night. And you had all these comforters to try and keep you warm. And then in the morning, someone had to get up and go put the friggin' fire down. So you think about now, like we have all our heating, and you have a hot shower. You just have to get out of bed and go get a hot shower, and even that's difficult for people. And then you think about having to wake up, get out of bed, out of a warmer bed, let's say, and then go downstairs, make a fire, and then wait like 2 hours for it to heat up the house. And that's the start of the day. That's like the first 15 minutes of that person's day to do that for their family. Just an inherent difficulty that we all take for granted now. But, I guess where I'm going with this is you and I talked about in the past how people historically, we don't really know, but they seem to have a bit more of an understanding and acceptance that life does have difficulties. And now I think because of all our creature comforts, we have trouble accepting that. And sometimes when we hit any discomfort, we kind of back away a little bit too soon, as opposed to, like you said, embracing it, right?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't root this in any kind of data or fact. I'm by no means an expert, but I do find that it's only recently, maybe 2 or 3 generations where that pendulum has switched from life is inherently difficult. And so there are also good times, and when the good times come, you enjoy them and embrace them, but that life is going to go back to being the norm is that it's inherently difficult, to the pendulum switching to, life should be easy. And when the difficulties come, then it becomes problematic and all of those sorts of things. Similar to you, my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, they seem to inherently understand that life was difficult, whether it's they had to start a fire or whatever the matter might be. They just knew that life came with the tasks there were difficult tasks every single day, and you just had to kind of persevere through those. And now if we were to wake up and have to do that today, we would be relatively distraught, to your example.
Well, last summer, I went to our family cabin, and it's like this, pile of boards in the middle of the woods, right? Me and my dad built it, and it wasn't in the summer. I think it was in early spring or late fall. No snow, but it was starting to getting a little cold outside. And I remember that. Like, I remember waking up being like, all right, I can either stay in bed in this already cold bed, but it's warmer, there's some comfort here, or I can get up and then make a fire. And that was like a mental battle. I'm thinking to myself, but then I remembered, like, well, most people throughout history during the winter had to but they just had to do this.
That was a
daily thing. Yeah.
And so that example, I think we could take that example on a much larger scale and say, in many difficulties in life that require resilience and determination and courage, maybe, it's a short term or intermittent term of difficulty for a longer term gain. So you have to get out of the cold bed and make the fire, but then the cabin warms up, right? And there's many examples where we could use that metaphor analogy in life where, that difficult situation is there, and you just have to, get yourself up and out of bed and put the hard work in and be resilient, and not run back to the bed and get under the covers and then, it passes and situations tend to be for the better. And I think that's the key of resilience, is what drives people to keep pushing through those moments, knowing that the other end is going to be more positive, rather than just, to your analogy, staying in the bed and maybe waiting for somebody else to start the fire, or just staying in the bed and being comfortable waiting it out, or those individuals who get up and try to start the fire, but then it's too cold, so then they shy back to the bed. Like that's the key to resilience. Is those that are resilient, I think, see that light at the end of the tunnel, and that's what drives them uh, to persevere through. To your example earlier there, though, I do think wisdom plays a crucial role, and I think the Stoics would say that as well. That is this a task that aligns with nature? Is it a virtuous task that I should take
Mm.
on? And if it is, then I need to be resilient. But there are certainly things that we could avoid if necessary. I do think resilience as well takes a certain capacity of will and courage. So I think it's important that individuals do use the wisdom to figure out where they need to be resilient and not, because I don't think it's something that can be sustainable consistently. So I think that wisdom is important, of finding those avenues that you don't want to go down because you don't have to burn that through that resilience that you might have. I think that wisdom is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So one of the ways that you can actually get that wisdom, though, is failure. Knowing what failure feels like. So, the fire example. You get up in the morning, and the house is cold, and you choose to not start that fire. And then all of a sudden your whole family's up and they're crying, they're upset, and the house is cold. The house just remains cold. And then you don't have the stove going, so you can't make breakfast. Like, it's just this cascade of effects. In the gym, if you tell yourself, I'm going to push through this set, and then you get like halfway through it and you put it on the rack, I know what that feels like. It feels terrible. It feels way worse than like my legs being sore for a week, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I just finished reading a book on a professional athlete, Max Domi. He plays in the National Hockey League, but a number of his chapters in his book, the book's titled "No Days Off," and it's predominantly about him living with type 1 diabetes. But he had to go through a number of failures to recognize where that resilience needed to be, and it's the failures that teach you sometimes the hardest lessons of what it means to not maybe be resilient, and you don't want to experience those failures anymore. So you develop the resilience to take those challenges on, or do what you have to do to be successful or healthy, or whatever the matter might be. And those lessons only come through failure.
Yeah, and it's the feelings associated with it too, which people don't like to hear. But if you've if you failed to start the fire in the morning for your family and they have to be cold all day, and then your neighbor comes over and is like, "What are you doing, man? You have, like your family's freezing. You're in bed. You don't have the fire going." Like, that's shameful, and you should feel shame about that. I always think about this kind of stuff as like I'd rather feel bad today and be better tomorrow than feel good about myself, like lying to myself, and then just be the same a-hole that I am tomorrow, right? But I feel like the whole feeling thing is, people are sensitive to it, and they feel like it's they just want to, like, they think they can go through life and never feel bad. And it's like, well, if you've done something that you shouldn't do, or if you're missing the mark, if you're failing on your duties, there probably is a bit of shame and a bit of feeling bad that goes along with that. But hopefully that motivates you to pick yourself up, right? Make yourself better.
I think you can be resilient too, to your point, and not be successful. I think you can be resilient and fail, or be resilient and not get the result that you were hoping for. And I think that's where the feelings come into play, that you have to be willing to take that risk that you might have to experience those feelings.
Yeah.
And I think that might be where some people might fall short, is they were resilient and didn't get the result that they wanted, or they felt a certain way, and then they don't want to try to be resilient again, because they don't want to feel shameful or embarrassed or whatever it might be. But I think you can be resilient and it's not always going to be the result you intended for it to be at the other end. You can probably relate in the physical world and in fitness. Maybe you're resilient and you get injured, or you're resilient and you make it to a competition and you don't perform the way you want, and you don't get the placing you want. Like there's feelings that will come with putting yourself out there and being resilient. Or you could not go to the competition at all and feel shameful or what have you. But just because you're going to be resilient doesn't mean you're going to get the result that you're hoping for. And I think that's something that people wrestle with a lot as well.
Yeah, and I think that's where Stoicism comes into play, right? Because Stoicism says maximize your agency and whatever happens, happens.
And be okay with it.
And be okay with it, yeah. And that is tough. Like, I get it, because we can't, like, as human beings, we can't help but want a particular outcome, you know? And this is where, like, the cynic and Stoic thing kind of differentiates, because cynics are more like, you know, you don't need anything. And Stoics are like, well, no, you don't, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try to improve your life and, you know, try and have more comfort and that. But yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a hard balance, right? But yeah, the whole feelings thing, it's like feelings, it's not that they don't matter. You have to be wise enough to know when your feelings are just BS, you know, and there, it's useful information, but it's not what should be keeping you on, you know, whatever path you're on, right?
Yeah. And what the Stoics would say as well is your feelings, although feelings, they will caution about, you know, your opinions on how you're seeing appearances, and are you generating feelings that might not be accurate.
Yeah.
But really it's your will and your alignment with nature that matters. And I think sometimes, and resilience would play into this as well, sometimes we caution because of the feelings of others, or how others are going to perceive things, or what our resilience might lead to in terms of others. And that draws us away from our own will and alignment with nature. And so we have to be wise enough to not put a whole lot of weight into that, right? Because that can sometimes, I think, prevent people from being resilient, as well as they know they have to. It's a wise choice to go through on a particular task or go through a certain situation a certain way, but the concern of how others are going to be impacted by that, even though you know it's the virtuous thing to do, or it's in alignment with your nature to take this path. It's how others are going to be impacted by that prevents you from being as resilient as you need to be. I think individuals should be cautious of that.
You have to be wary of it. Yeah, you have to consider, you know, social impact and community, and, you know, it gets to the Stoic circles of concern, right? Like your family and then the community and all this. But yeah, it's you know, Ralph Waldo Emerson, he talks a lot about self-reliance, you know, but then there's also like, no, there's the community aspect of it as well. Yeah, so yeah, 100%. You have to be, it's hard because we are human beings, and I don't know if you know the theory on, like, that our minds are like 10% B. Are you familiar with that from The Righteous Mind, Jonathan Haidt?
Somewhat, yeah.
Yeah, he talks about how, like, human beings are like 10% B, meaning bees, they solely think for the community. So you look at a beehive, and they're all individual bees, but their psychology is on the whole group, right? So they don't have an individual. That's why they're willing to sacrifice themselves for others. They don't have like an individual psychology per se. And he makes the argument that human beings are a little bit of that, right? Like not as bad as bees, but a little bit of that. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think the Stoics would agree with that. I think it's why they put a lot of emphasis on self-reliance, but then they don't discount that the whole community aspect also, right?
Yeah, and I think I'm a bit of a political buff myself. I read a lot of books on history and study history quite a bit, and follow topics like politics quite a bit. But I think to that example there's all kinds of cases throughout history where people took a leap of faith and were resilient for the greater good. Maybe at the sacrifice of their own personal comforts, and knowing full well when they take a certain path that there are going to be many others impacted by that, but they felt truly it was for the greater good. And so they were resilient enough to go through and do what they needed to do, knowing that their family were going to be impacted and their communities were going to be impacted and their own personal lives and comfort were going to be impacted. And that takes a certain level of resilience and a balancing act to know that I truly believe that this is for the greater good, even though it's going to have the impact that it's going to have. Mm-hmm. Especially in today's world, for example, if you look at, I'm sure any politician today would say the impact that their path is going to have on their families and whatnot in the media, but it's truly for the greater good. And so, not that they don't worry about that, but they feel like there's a level of commitment there for the greater good, despite the impact it's going to have. So it's not maybe what the Stoics would say as in don't concern yourself with that. But they feel strong enough to keep going even though they're concerned with that. For the greater good, or for they feel in their nature, this is the alignment of me and my will and my nature. And so, I'm going to persevere through.
Well, there are some people, I think they're rare, but there are people that are cosmopolitan. So there are people, Diogenes, I just had someone who wrote a book on him, but he didn't have any family. He didn't have any friends. He was a cosmopolitan, and he kind of had friendly interactions with everyone. And so to your point, the whole circles of concern thing, most people would have yourself, your family, your community, your country, the world, the cosmos kind of thing. But not everyone is like that. There are people, and they tend to gravitate towards these extreme leadership positions. They do have, by definition, they have to have, if they're a good leader, different circles of concern, different arrangements there. I'd be curious to hear you talk about Churchill, because I know you know quite a bit about him. But yeah, talk about that decision where, for those who might not know, the whole D-Day thing, and then how he had to make that decision. I think he was up all night just like contemplating if that was the right choice. But I know you know that pretty well, so I'd be curious to hear you talk to that.
Yeah, I guess that would be an example of resilience for the greater good, knowing, exactly what impact that's going to have on a tremendous amount of people.
But just walk people through what that was.
Yeah, well, Winston Churchill himself, I think, would, if anybody's followed or read about him, was quite resilient in many ways in his own life, like his own personal life, and then his political career almost fell apart completely multiple times. He's predominantly only remembered for the years 1940 to 1945 when he predominantly led the Allies to victory through World War II. But prior to that, his whole political career was quite tumultuous, and he almost, was non-existent in 1940 to take this role on. But then many decisions throughout that World War II period, including the D-Day invasions on June 6th, 1944, when he knew full well he was sending multiple people to their deaths, all in the name of gaining a foothold on Western Europe to liberate the Western European continent. So the night of June 5th into June 6th, he was up until about 2 a.m. And the last thing he said to his wife, Clementine, before going to bed is, when I wake up in the morning, 20,000 Allied troops are going to be dead. So, knowing full well the decisions that were made and the plans that were in place and the weight of all of that, knowing that it was the option for the greater good, at the expense of many individuals and their families and communities. And but for an individual or any, there's many examples of individuals in that situation, but the resilience to do that, and knowing that the decision does kind of rest with you, or predominantly with you, for the greater good, is something that is an interesting concept.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure he had opposition to that, probably in large numbers. So you can imagine just did he know it was going to be successful? Well, of course not. You can't know, right? Like this was, in his opinion, the best chance they have at getting a foothold and maybe winning the war, right?
Yep.
But it very well could have. I mean, it could have turned out another way.
Very well.
It worked, but a number of things could have changed that would have resulted in a difference. So it's like even the best case scenario, I'm sending 20,000 people to die. Like that is to carry that, and to carry that decision, and to know the impact and to feel the impact, which he did, and still make that decision because he knows it's the right decision. That is resilience. Like that's stoic right there.
Yeah. And he's an example of somebody who sought that role out, right? He didn't shy away from taking on the prime ministership at a time where Britain was on the brink. And so he was actually seeking out that the circumstances were unique on how he became prime minister, but he was always ready to go to bat, and full well what that's going to entail. Decisions of this nature, right? But he did struggle with those in his own certain way, but it would be a tremendous decision. But to your point there, back to our previous point early in the conversation, that failure is a big part of resilience, but also hindsight gives us insight on resilience. But we look back in history as that being a great decision, because D-Day was successful overall, and then the Allies just kept pushing through and liberated Europe. But it very well could have went the other way. And on that evening of June 5th, 1944, nobody knew what the result was going to be. And history would have wrote that a whole different way. We would be looking at that a whole different way today if it had have ended any other way. But to have the courage and the wisdom, and looking at everything you could possibly look at to say, this is the best possible scenario right now in this moment, and I just have to make the decision and go to bed, which was what he did. It takes a tremendous amount of resilience, I think, to do that.
Mm-hmm. And to deal with opposition is so hard, for those who have never been in a leadership position. It's like you have an idea of the best way to move forward, and then you have sometimes equivalents on the other side of the table telling you are wrong, and giving you, a lot of times, giving you some good reasons why you were wrong or could be wrong, right? And it goes back to that being not ignoring it. Someone comes to you and says, listen, this is a wrong decision and here's why, X, Y, Z. You have to take that in and you have to analyze it. But ultimately, the decision rests with you, right? And the whole wisdom thing, it's like, you look back at history and you say, like you said, yeah, D-Day was great, man. Amen to Churchill. But they had no idea that was going to be a success, right? So the whole wisdom part of wisdom is accepting that you don't know the outcome and you don't know the best plan of action. You're taking a best guess. So it's kind of like counterintuitive in the sense that the wise action is knowing what to do, but it's also knowing that no matter what you do, you don't know what the outcome is.
Yeah. And to not have any of that prevent you, there's not anything that indicates that Churchill was a Stoic.
Yeah.
He read a lot of ancient history and was, versed in a lot of different things, but there's no mention anywhere that I've ever read that he was a practicing Stoic. But to go ahead and make a decision and be okay with whatever happens, you can't just be passive and hope that, back to our fire analogy, hope that somebody lights the fire and warms the cabin up. Somebody has to get up out of bed and go do it, and potentially fail, and be wise enough and resilient enough to do that. Well, and the opposition point is crucial, I think, because you have to be wise enough to not let your ego drive your resilience. I think that's a dangerous scenario where you feel like you're resilient without taking into account, all the different angles.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be wise enough to say, that makes sense, and accept opposition, to make the best choices in any given situation. And I think that can be in our own, Winston Churchill in D-Day is a earth-shattering moment where, the world we know it today would have been totally, totally different. But in our daily lives too, I think part of being resilient is being open to opposition.
Mm-hmm.
If you have to shift careers, if you have to move, out of your residence to another place, if you have to make some decisions in your life that are going to take resilience, being open to other people's feedback is part of being resilient. I think it would be amiss if we said that resilience is solely just moving ahead on your own and making decisions on your own and resolving everything on your own.
Mm-hmm.
I think in our daily lives, being open to opposition is part of being resilient. Yeah. I don't know if we would truly be resilient if there was no opposition, because then you're just kind of going ahead on your own accord, and it wouldn't maybe be resilience. It would be something else. I think opposition is a very real part of resilience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. And I think through the opposition, you gain resilience, right? It is by dealing with those people, even though like in the moment at the time, it's not a pleasant thing to deal with conflict. I think Churchill might have been one of those people who enjoyed it to some degree, and that helps.
I think
right?
so.
Right? Like that helps.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think most people are conflict averse. And so they get uncomfortable, with conflict. But it's managing that effectively that ultimately makes you wiser, and is able to, move you forward, and improve your wisdom, hopefully make better decisions in the future.
Yeah, the Stoics would say as well, I think that, comfort in conflict is important. I think that, being adverse to conflict might not be as stoic as we might think it would be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like somebody like Churchill, I think, was experienced enough in conflict and felt confident enough in their own abilities to just engage in conflict without not a disregard for it, but just a strong enough will to just engage in it whenever it arose, kind of thing. But I think conflict is maybe fundamental to resilience. Maybe not even just person-to-person conflict, but it could be conflict with other areas of life, or it could be conflict with societal measures or organizations or structures or what have you. Like, it might not be even just with an individual, on an individual to individual basis. It might just be conflict in general. And if you're adverse or shy of that, you might find yourself having difficulty developing resilience, I think.
Mm-hmm. Hey there. Let me thank you for being a listener to this ad-free podcast. If you enjoy the podcast, there are a few things you can do to help me out. A 5-star review on Spotify or wherever you're listening to this really does help, and it's free. You can also sign up for my Substack newsletter or Patreon. Substack free gets each episode emailed to you along with the transcripts in the form of an article. You'll also get access to my live talks, followed by a Q&A afterward. Substack Premium supporters and my patrons on Patreon get access to the recordings and a brief article of those Q&A sessions, access to full episodes of the Paradoxically Speaking podcast, my Steps to Success interview series, Stoic meditations, and much more. Links to Substack and Patreon can be found in the show notes. What I've found is that the more you develop and take on bigger positions at work or in your community, I think conflict starts to become an inevitable part of it. And you get to like Churchill's level where pretty much every day, like you have conflict with Germany and then you have conflict with the opposition in your own country, right? Like it's even, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, even people on your own team sometimes are a constant source of conflict. And it does take courage and a calm mind, because you can get too emotional about it too, which isn't good. But it takes a calm mind and courage to be able to really deal with that every single day. Like every situation that you get where, all right, I have an opportunity here. I could probably just ignore this and, it might go away. It might not. It might get terrible. Nevertheless, as a leader in this position or whatever you're doing, I am called to engage in this conflict in a productive and proactive way. And to make that decision several times a day, right? As a leader, it's hard. It's hard. But again, resilience, like that is actually what it is. Doing it every day. It's like, it's not running a marathon once, in 10 years. It's like those little tiny battles every single day.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is with Churchill, for example, to go back to some historical pieces, he was so strong-willed that he faced conflict even within his own inner circles, and just if he felt he was right, he was going to kind of persevere through and be resilient enough to go through with whatever needed to be done. His counterpart in the United States, Franklin Roosevelt, one thing if you read about FDR or study FDR, is he had the ability to also face a tremendous amount of conflict or resistance or opposition, but he had an act to make others feel like they can embrace that, and also help others feel like they were part of that, instead of being so adversary all the time. Even if it was at odds ends, he had a personality type that made others embrace resilience and made their impact or their contribution feel important, even though he was going to continue on through with whatever he thought was right, where Churchill would have just maybe went head to head with his opposition and still persevered through. FDR kind of helped everybody else embrace that conflict and made sure that everybody felt they had an important role to play in it, which is two unique angles to resilience, I think. And we could mine that down to our own personal lives, not on a world scale, but, you can be resilient and just kind of, plow your way through whatever situation it is and have a strong enough will to do that. Or you can face conflict and opposition and things like that, and really embrace the process and embrace everybody that's involved in it, even though you still want to be virtuous and strong-willed enough to not sacrifice your own path. I think that's really important, is to not just bow away, but to help others embrace that as well and be a part of the resilience, I think is really important as well.
Yeah, I think that if you were to ask the average 18-year-old on D-Day, like what made you have the courage to come here? I think a lot of them would say, my friends came, my family came.
Mhm.
So I think there is courage that courage is contagious, right? Like virtue is contagious. Uh, if you're in a group of people who are fighting for your country, yeah, it can feed on itself, and it's very cool to see that when that happens. I've seen that not in war, but in my own industry where you'll have like an incident happen, something happens, and then you'll see kind of one person start to pick up the shovel, right, and start dealing with it, and then people just fall in line, and everybody, like, courage is like it is a contagious thing, and so I guess it's probably a decent piece of advice that if by self-diagnosis you feel like you're not particularly resilient or courageous, um, find a group, find some friends, like join a CrossFit gym, like get a group, because by that you will start to move towards that just by being around it.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I don't think courage is isolating. To those 18-year-olds on D-Day, probably a lot of the motivation that they had was the people sitting right next to them, right? Not maybe all the political theories and the world order and those sorts of things. If you were in a landing craft going to D-Day, your motivation was probably the individual sitting around you, and maybe some of that greater good too. You're fighting for your nation or whatever it might have been, and that pride. But I don't think courage is an isolating thing, and I think that's a really important distinction when it comes to resilience. Is we're seeing it more and more today. I think that maybe in the past, resilience, the Stoics would say you have to have a strong enough will yourself before you can contribute to the greater good, and to the universe as a whole. You have to be able to take care of your own fortress first before you can branch out and contribute positively and virtuously to everything else. But I think you don't have to be alone in that. And I think you see that much more today, whether it's individuals seeking help to be resilient or find different ways to be motivated to be resilient. It doesn't all have to be in your own head and you just, coming to your own conclusions. You can seek assistance out there, whether it's a group, a CrossFit gym, or similar-minded people, or therapy, or all kinds of avenues that can help you strengthen your own resilience. I think it's an often misunderstood concept that courage is individual and that resilience is individual. I think all of that is to strengthen your own will, but like engaging in a CrossFit gym with a group of people is to strengthen your own will and determination and character. But seeking that opportunity out to strengthen your own will and character is important, rather than just trying to develop it yourself and then you go join a CrossFit gym, right? Or you find a group of like-minded people to help strengthen your character, rather than feeling like you have a strong enough character already, and then you go seek out groups. I think courage is not an isolating thing, and resilience is not an isolated concept either. The Stoics would probably say the same.
Yeah, for sure. I think in some sense the Stoics would say that your virtue flourishes by interacting with other people's virtue. Like it's, I would even think they say that because they emphasize logos so much, right? In the fundamental philosophy, and logos being things like dialogue, discussion, um, it's a curious thought experiment to think, like, if you were isolated, could you arrive at any rationality? Because it's by bouncing off the external world that you figure out what's right and what's not. So yeah, I think it's very fundamental. I think Stoicism has been captured by like the self-help part of it in the modern sense. But I think fundamentally, the cosmopolitan, it's so ingrained. It's like they say, the cosmopolis is an external, so therefore it's outside of your control. But you're a part of the cosmopolis, so it's there's paradoxes in the Stoic philosophy, and I feel like the modern Stoics have stripped a lot of that away. But I think they're missing out on some very valuable input, such as the group / individual courage paradox, right?
Yeah, I think going at life alone is and firmly believing. I think that is an idea that did exist and maybe still exists. Is I can just go at this alone, and I'm courageous enough and strong enough that I'm just going to deal with whatever life brings at me. But I think having the wisdom to know that there is strength in unity, and there's strength in engaging with your community and the universe in general, and the cosmos, probably makes you more resilient. And if you look at those historical figures like Churchill, who is often looked upon as just holding the weight of Britain for sure, if not the whole Western Hemisphere and democracy in general, on his shoulders solely, and just traversing his way through and bringing that all through to victory. He also had his inner circle of people who he was confident with, who he had confidence in, and who weren't at the forefront. They weren't, in the media with him, or they weren't, at the forefront of everything. They were in his house around the dinner table, and they were always there, him bouncing ideas off them bouncing ideas off him. And he certainly wasn't alone, per se, just going through this on his own. And people often forget things like that, having that sense of community really makes you be more resilient, than just having that strength in character, that philosophy that I can just be strong enough myself to deal with whatever life throws at me. And I wouldn't confuse that with, you should have a strong will and a strong sense of character. That'll certainly help you be resilient, but you shouldn't be so ego driven that you think you can just go at it alone.
Mm-hmm.
You should definitely engage with a community to help strengthen your character and your resilience, for sure.
Yeah, I think there is a modern movement. It's kind of a niche thing, but it's men going their own way. Have you heard about that? So it's a niche, I would say, of the red pill movement. But it's basically like the world's not set up for men anymore, and we have to, not engage in like romantic relationships or basically lone wolf mentality. And I had a comment there a little while back, trying to say that was a Stoic thing. I'm like, that is like so ridiculous to say that, like, you being a loner. It can be for some people, that are extremely introverted, and they, there are people in the world that exist that, sure, maybe that would work, but overwhelmingly, I think that's such a false narrative. I think that, again, like, forming those bonds, those relationships, that is entirely Stoic. It's not that it aligns with Stoicism. It's like, no, that is Stoic 100%. Like, it's, community, family, relationships. Again, understanding that you do get that, that Diogenes that every now and then that gets born. That is like a true cosmopolitan loner, but not something I think most people can really resonate with.
Yeah, I'll use a personal example here. It just comes to mind. To be virtuous is to continue to contribute positively to the cosmos. So, not long ago, I go for routine blood work every year, and about 2 years ago, a physician told me that men my age rarely get their blood work taken routinely. And so they thought that was kind of courageous act or a wise act to be proactive in getting my just routine blood work, requesting routine blood work once a year. Um, but I think that's a good example of being resilient, because in order to sustain your health, you need to do things like get your blood work tested every so often, so that you can sustain your health, or be proactive, so that you can continue to contribute positively to your own life, to your family's life, to your community, and all those sorts of things. But I think sometimes what the physician was trying to get at is that, I think there's a lot of men out there for sure who think that being resilient is just, uh, you know, toughening up and not being so vulnerable, maybe, and saying like, maybe I should go look into my health, or they wait for things to come at them. And then when it happens, then they think they're being resilient by going through it and all of those sorts of things, where the wise act might be to be vulnerable and say, look, yeah, I'm a man, but I want to get my blood checked to, be proactive and things like that. And that is, I think, being resilient.
Yeah, well, it's like because I mean, resilience, we're using resilience as kind of the theme of this episode, but, you can tie it to the courage, to the virtue of courage. And, I mean, all the virtues, the cardinal virtues, you can't have one without the other. Like, you can't have a foolish act that's courageous. It just doesn't make any sense, right? So yeah, like 100% being proactive, taking care of yourself. And then the whole vulnerability part of it, it's funny because there is a part of you that is afraid of getting a health check, right? So like there is a vulnerability part of it where it's like, yeah, you could get something that'll scare you there. And a lot of people would rather be ignorant to that, and to me, that's cowardice. That's, because you're not willing to face, the truth. I did want to throw something at you too, though, because I think it's important, you're talking about being vulnerable, and just kind of like being able to feel things and let things, embrace emotions, I guess. I do think that there are times when shit hits the fan where you gotta man up. Like you gotta deal with shit. And I see, like, if you ever see someone deal with a crisis and they fall apart, like, now's not the time, man. Like, now's the time to do what you got to do to get the situation stabilized. And then after, when you're in a safer position, then you can kind of relax, and then you can, get to that side of things. But I think you need both. I think, like, today, I feel like most people are embracing the more be vulnerable thing, and, like, understand that there's weakness inherent. Like, you're a vulnerable person. Sure, but, someone breaks in the middle of the night, it's probably not time to cry. It's probably time to smash your window and jump out, right?
I would agree 100%. I think it goes back to that point we made earlier of life's inherently difficult. And when you understand that, you can be vulnerable and stuff like that, but you still have to face it, regardless of what's coming at you. And so, you got to strengthen up and face the fire. You got to get up out of bed and start that fire when you need to. There's time to be vulnerable after, and things like that. To use your analogy earlier there of the fire, you got to wake up and start the fire and do whatever it takes, be cold for 2 hours until the cabin warms up and stuff. And then you can kind of curl up in a blanket later on and relax, right? But you for sure have to understand that life is difficult, and you can't be so vulnerable that you drift away from that, for sure.
Yeah, because you could say, Churchill, why didn't you tell them your plan? You could be really vulnerable then, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Just maximize vulnerability. Just tell them exactly what you're going to do.
Yeah. Or in your head, you're second guessing yourself, right? Is this the right is this the right decision? But you certainly don't want to be, when you're in a position that he was in, you know, you certainly don't want all the troops on their way to the shore to hear you say, you're not quite sure.
Yeah.
You can't be that vulnerable that you're just so open that you say, like, you know what, I'm not really sure if this is the right. You're steadfast in, this is the moment and this is the decision and this is the way we're going. Even if your own head, you're thinking, is this even going to work? Which he might have been thinking.
Yeah.
But you certainly don't want that 18-year-old on the landing craft going to the beach, get wind that you're not quite sure.
Yeah.
This is the right decision. So vulnerability, you have to be careful with vulnerability. I think it is important to be vulnerable. Back to a previous point there, like, you can't be so ego driven that you think you're absolutely unequivocally so hardened and strong that there's no question,
Yeah.
you're right. But you have to be careful about how much you let vulnerability creep in.
Yeah.
And how much you project vulnerability, because that can have adverse effects for sure.
Yeah, it can. Absolutely.
Even in your own personal life. I mean, Churchill, again, was on a world stage and had, the implications of the situation he was in are quite substantial.
Yeah.
But in our own lives too, in our own personal lives, I think you do have to be steadfast for sure, and be very cautious be open to vulnerability, but be very cautious of how much you allow vulnerability to impact your daily life.
Yeah. It's time and place, man.
Yeah.
And it's time and place, and it's context. It's like who, because this is the other thing. There's this, I think, foolish idea that if you're different in front of different people, then you're ingenuine, and that's just so ridiculous, right? Like, you mean to tell me anyone is going to be the same in front of their wife, husband, than they are in front of like or like a 10-year-old in a store that you see? Like, come on, man. It's there's context there, right? So, like, the whole vulnerability thing, and when is it time to grab the spear, and when is it time to maybe do some journaling on how terrible it was to kill that boar,
Yeah. And what the Stoics would say is, the Stoics were quite vulnerable in even exploring the concept of death.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of people don't want to think about death at all. But the Stoics were open to thinking about death and talking about death. And journaling is a great example of vulnerability, I think. I journal quite frequently, but if you think about waking up every day, and I have about a half-hour commute to my job, I get in a car every day, which is vulnerability, essentially. You look at the statistics of automobile accidents and whatnot, it takes quite a bit of vulnerability to even get in a car and hit the road. But you have to be okay with whatever's going to happen there. Like, you're subconsciously, I think, just doing it. But you can't shy away from that. You wouldn't be able to wake up every day and be so vulnerable that you can't get in the car. But maybe you drive to work, you see 2 car accidents on the way. You have to drive home from work, the weather's bad or something, and then you journal that night and say, wow, I'm so grateful that I got home safe. And now you're being vulnerable in processing all of that, but you're not so vulnerable that it's impacting. That's where that resilience comes in, right? If you wake up and think you're sitting on your steps for an hour and a half wondering if you're going to get in the car, you have to be resilient enough to get up and go and do it. And then there's a time and place for vulnerability, which would maybe be journaling that night. I'm so grateful that I didn't get in an automobile accident today, which is a great thing to journal, right? But you have to be resilient enough to drive your car around all day, because that's just life.
Yeah.
Or that's what's required to lead a virtuous life, or whatever is required, right? So it's quite an interesting, but I think some people don't have the balance that you alluded to earlier there, where they're going in their cars every day, for example, but they don't reflect on that.
Yeah, they're not aware.
They're not vulnerable enough, or they're not aware enough to reflect on, wow, I drive a car around all the time. I never got in a car accident, which is
Yeah.
important, I think.
Yeah.
Or there's other people that are terrified to get in a car. So you have to find that balance of, driving around. I'm going to drive my car around all day, every day, but I might allude to it in my journal at some point in time and be a little bit vulnerable and say, I'm so happy I've never gotten a significant automobile accident.
Well, you can
Right.
certainly go through life and conveniently ignore facts.
Yeah.
And that is not courage, right?
Yeah.
So you getting in a vehicle, this happens with teenagers all the time. You get your license and they just have no concept of how vulnerable it is to actually drive. Like the statistics on it. Anytime you look at them, it's just
They're,
mind blowing. Right?
they're
They're
concerning. They're concerning.
Definitely. So and that happens where you have teenagers who are not wise, and so they get in a vehicle, and that's not courage, right? How many people go through life conveniently ignoring the fact that they're going to die someday? Like they just don't think about it. And whenever that thought comes to mind, they just push it right out of their head, right? And the Stoics say, well, maybe we should embrace a little bit of this. Like maybe we should write about this. Maybe we should think on it. Tying back to that whole the feeling thing. Like it doesn't feel good to think about the fact that you're going to die. That feels terrible. But the Stoics say, well, maybe we should do that for resilience sake. Try and fight this fear to our capacity. I guess blissful ignorance is not resilience. So two people driving down the road, they're both driving, but that doesn't mean they're both necessarily being strong.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And that Stoic concept of what is within your control, and focus in on that, and what is not within your control, but to not ignore those concepts of what's not in your control, but to be cautious of how much you let those impact you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the Stoics would say your body is not in your control, and death is not in your control, and all of these things are inevitable. So focus on what you can control, but also give thought to those things that you can't control. Don't be negligent with your body. The Stoics believed in being healthy and exercising and, all of those sorts of things. Don't be negligent because your body's not within your control. You can't just be negligent, but don't let all of that impact your own will and virtue and courage to the point where you can't be a positive contributor to your own life and your community and the cosmos in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a real privilege to be of use, to be useful to your family and community. And, it's some people see it as like a nuisance, when like a friend asks you, you got a truck and your friend says, hey, do you mind helping me move? You got a truck. And you think, well, just because I have a truck. But if you think about that, like what a privileged position for you to be in, to have a truck that can help someone else move, right? Like you can be someone else's good fortune if you choose it, right? And it's like that, just changing the perspective on that to being one of not, okay, this is a nuisance, to, no, this is actually pretty cool that I have something that I can actually be of use to someone.
Yeah, I read something recently. I'm after forgetting where exactly I read it, but what is required to actually live a good life? And it's a limited list of things. Shelter. It's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Shelter, connection, things like that, food. And so I think we sometimes, back to a previous point there, confuse things like resilience, and back to your previous point a while ago there about wisdom, to just recognize what you're being resilient enough, just getting those basic needs. And so some of these other difficulties, you and I have talked before about, say, car trouble. So say we're driving to work and we get a flat tire, and we think we're making it back to the Stoic concept of opinions of that, right? This is a huge problem. I'm going to be late for work. I have to buy a new tire. A lot of that's just opinion, and we sometimes mask that as being resilient. We get the new tire, we get back on the road, we get to work. I'm so resilient. When really, that's just life. And I think sometimes we confuse all of that. That we're sometimes resilient enough just meeting the basic needs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I find it cool to think about that. So you take the flat tire thing, right? Okay, I went to work and I got a flat tire. I'm late for work. Had to cab. Had to pay $40. And then you think about someone in Ukraine getting in their vehicle, driving away, and then they get a flat tire, and then it's like just changing the perspective a little bit, which you can do to infinity. Right? Like you can always imagine a situation that's worse, far worse than the situation that you're in right now. Like that's an infinite supply of gratitude right there. But we get a flat tire, we're late for work, we got to pay $40 for a cab, and our life sucks, right?
Yeah. And I think sometimes with that particular situation, and the Stoics would agree with this, I think, that, maybe just go home for the day.
Yeah.
If you're to your previous example there of pushing your body to exceptional limits and things like that, sometimes we're under the guise of resilience, pushing ourselves to limits that are unnecessary.
Yeah.
I had a flat tire. I'm already 2 hours late for work. I got to wait for the tow truck and stuff. Why don't I just take the rest of the day off?
Yeah.
And the Stoics would say, it is what it is.
Maybe that's what you got to do.
Yeah. And let it be. Maybe you got to catch up a little bit more tomorrow or something, but just it is, this is the situation.
Mm.
And sometimes and that's where wisdom would come in. We think that just persevering through for the sake of an appearance or an opinion is resilience, but maybe it's just stepping back and taking the rest of the day off there. And what could be wrong with that, right?
Well, I'll give you a great example of this from my personal life. I do a cold plunge every morning, and I used to do it at 2 to 4 degrees Celsius. So I'd get up, I'd do the ice bath, I'd shower, get ready, go start work early. I moved my workout to the morning, so now it's ice bath, workout, shower, work, all rest of the day. What I noticed is I can't do an ice bath at 2 degrees and go to the gym because all my muscles are so tight. I don't have like the hot shower. Now I could take a shower and relax the muscles, but then you're adding like 10 minutes on your routine. Moral of the story is I looked back into the literature on cold plunging, and it's not a you have to be 2 degrees. It's like temperature versus time. So I was spending 3 minutes in there. Moral of the story is I only really needed that to be like 10 to 12 degrees. So I adjusted the bath to 10 to 12 degrees, and I'm able to warm up properly, and then I can do my workout so my muscles aren't seizing. Now, the funny thing about this is that that 8 degree difference, completely unnecessary. Like there's no net benefit to me doing that other than, yeah, man, I do an ice bath at 3 degrees. Right? Yeah, I get to see ice floating in the thing. And the other thing that's interesting about this is that like 5:30 in the morning, it feels like 2 degrees. Like it feels the same. Like it's freezing, like I just left a warm bed and I'm getting into this very cold water. It's not like my body's tuned into, it's 8 degrees colder. It still sucks, right? So anyways, just a lesson in that, sometimes just because it's harder, that doesn't, like, you're being stupid. You're being foolish, because you're ruining the rest of your day because of this prideful thing.
Yep. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of lesson to be had in that, and wisdom to be had in that, like, what's the definition of failure? And just giving your best virtuous, courageous attempt at stuff. The Stoics would say the same, that sometimes we're, falling quote unquote short of what we think we should be falling short of, but we're still being resilient. We're still being courageous. We're still going through life at a good pace and things like that. And not to be so hard on ourselves and set up these false situations where, we're actually thriving, but adding unnecessary layers of challenge to our lives that are unnecessary. If you look at, say the Toronto Blue Jays this year losing Game 7 of the World Series in extra innings, and were they not resilient? Of course they were resilient, right? But would they have wanted to win? 100%. But you got to look at scenarios, and that's still a great place to be.
Mm.
Similar to your ice bath, there's lots of people not taking ice baths at all, and and that's a pretty courageous thing to do, and a pretty big undertaking to have, and that's great. That's awesome, right? And sometimes we have these pinnacles that we think we have to reach to say we're resilient or strong or courageous, but to our initial thought, we're much stronger, I think, than we think. Mm-hmm. And we have to I think people need to give themselves credit for that.
Yeah, you're reminding me of my good friend Josh Bertolotti. He always reminds me of this quote from Seneca, and it's not that I ignore it. I love this. It's almost like I'm uncomfortable with it, maybe where I am in my life. But he said near the end of his life, he said, "If I have learned anything, it's how to be a better friend to myself." Right.
Yeah.
And Josh, like, it's so funny because Josh always brings this up, and I'm like, God, like that's where you want to be at the end of if there is an end of your Stoic journey. Like, I think that's full development right there, because it implies a couple things. First of all, I know how to be a friend, and second of all, I know how to be a friend to myself, and I think if there's anywhere, any good place to end up, I think that's got to be pretty close.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I think that's an important one, right? Is to just, that reflection piece is so key, right? That you're much stronger than you might give yourself credit for. As long as you truly feel that your will and your virtue and your courage are all in place, and you're putting your best foot forward, then you got to give yourself credit for that. And know that you're much stronger. You always want to have goals and thrive to be the next step and the next level and things like that. But you also have to give yourself that grace, I think.
Mm-hmm. Emerson has a wonderful quote on that. Have you ever read his?
I've read a lot of Emerson's stuff, but I don't know if I know exactly which quote you're referring to. But
it'd be a great way to wrap up if I can find it here. Oh yeah, okay. Thanks, ChatGPT. I want the full quote. There we go. Write it on your heart that every day is the best day in the year. He is rich who owns the day, and no one owns the day who allows it to be invaded with fret and anxiety. Finish every day and be done with it. You have done what you could. Some blunders and absurdities no doubt crept in. Forget them as soon as you can. Tomorrow is a new day. Begin it well and serenely with too high a spirit to be cumbered with your old nonsense. This new day is too dear with its hopes and invitations to waste a moment on the yesterdays.
Love that. Yeah, and it reminds me of Marcus Aurelius as well, saying, I believe it was Marcus Aurelius, imagine that you have died, right? And now live the rest of your life, as you think you should. And that's what I see resonating there with Emerson as well, is, you are where you are, and you're in the situation that you're in at any given moment, and just, face it with resilience and embrace the day and keep doing that every single day.
I love the with too high a spirit to be cumbered with your old nonsense, because you're talking about yesterday, right? It's like and it's true. Like every day you go to bed, there's a bunch of stuff that you might not be happy with how they turned out. Maybe you did something not right, but it's your old nonsense. It's in the past, right? Move on.
And we could take Emerson here and use it on our car, our flat tire example. Right, this new day is too dear with its hopes and invitations. Say you did go home from work after having a flat tire, or you didn't even get to work. You just went home. Wake up the next day and go for it. Right, the new day is too dear with its hopes and invitations to even give thought to yesterday. And if you think on a much grander scale to what we talked about earlier with say Churchill, I mean, he woke up on June 7th and however many soldiers, X amount of Allied soldiers died on June 6th. You gotta, don't let those blunders and absurdities creep in. You done what you could, right? And embrace this new day, right? Not that any of that would be nonsense, but he is rich who owns the day, right? And no one owns the day who allows it to be invaded with fret and anxiety. And so, it is what it is, and be reflective, but embrace each moment as it comes, for sure.
That's a great way to wrap it up, man.
Yeah,
thanks for being
here. It's been a pleasure.
Here.
Yeah, thanks so much.
It's been good fun. It's been a good chat. We got hour and a half in. That's half.
Awesome.
That's a half a Rogan podcast. We're gonna have to rock and roll.
That's
with
awesome.
That,
I'd love to be back, but thanks so much for the time and great chat.
Yeah, man.
Always a pleasure.
Until next time.